Uhuru Sasa, which means freedom now in Kiswahili. I think it's maybe one of the top 10 languages on the small planet that we call Earth. And we're getting ready. We just completed the Jazz Zone with T.N. Providence, and we're getting ready to speak with Dr. Gerald Horne. Dr. Gerald Horne is the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. His most recent work, The Capital of Slavery, is Capital of Slavery from Washington, D.C. from 1800 to 1885 is a book that everyone should read. And we would like to welcome comrade, brother, Dr. Gerald Horne. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, it's all good. And just a footnote, the subtitle is Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. But in any case, I'd like to report breaking news. Recall that just a few days ago, we reported on events in Madagascar in terms of student uprising, youth uprisings, etc. Well, apparently today, what's unfolding is a military intervention in that nation, that island nation off the southeast coast of Africa, not far distant from Mozambique. And we're not able to report at the moment as to the political implications of this particular ongoing coup. And keep in mind, the coup may fail. But after watching video of the soldiers who were seeking to execute this coup, I can report to you that for whatever reason, the soldiers seem to be coming from the from the east side of the island, which faces Indonesia and the Indian Ocean, as opposed to the west side of Africa, which the east side of Africa, of course, faces Indian Ocean and Indonesia. The west side faces Africa. And the coup mongers apparently come mostly from the east side. I'm not sure of the implications of that, but we'll be keen and certain to report on that as the situation develops. And as we reported some days ago, Madagascar was implicated in the unlimited African slave trade. I suggested that I'd interview the scholar who had said that the ancestors of the late great Muhammad Ali actually had roots in Madagascar. So this is a country that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Of course, you reported of the connection of Thomas Sankara, the hero of Burkina Faso, and his being politicized in Madagascar while he was stationed there. So that's the latest from Southeast Africa.
And Melinda, you want to begin the interview?
Yeah, let's go to U.S. China.
Well, let us go. Tell me if you can hear this.
Yes.
Did you hear that?
Hey, it's going to be a show. Yeah, showdown. Yeah, hey, yes, sir.
Well, it's from, of course, Archie Bell and the Drells from Houston, Texas. And I think that song may become our theme for 2025 and going forward. Because what is unfolding as we speak is a showdown between the People's Republic of China and the United States of America. It was ignited, at least in the immediate sense, just a day or two ago when China sought to circumscribe the exporting of rare earth minerals to not only the United States, but worldwide. But principally targeting the United States, these rare earth minerals are necessary for a complex economy, these semiconductor chips that go into your cars, your smartphones, your computers, into fighter jets, etc. Mr. Trump, with his typical lack of prudence and patience, erupted, saying that he was going to slap 100% tariff on top of the 30% tariff on Chinese exports to the United States of America. He said that he would not meet with Chairman Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping, in Seoul in a few weeks at the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting in South Korea. He tended to walk back the latter point. But I think that what this maneuver by China represents is a growing confidence on their part that in some ways they have US imperialism over a barrel. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves, because US imperialism has been over a barrel more than once in recent decades. And like a boxer, it's been able to cover up, go against the ropes, and then come back swinging. Punches left and right. However, if you look in the past few months, we can understand why China might be confident. That is to say, I think it's important to interpret the August 2025 summit between Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump as a last-ditch effort by US imperialism to woo Russia into an anti-China cabal, just like, as we know, China was wooed into an anti-Moscow cabal. But apparently, the results from that meeting have not been satisfying to US imperialism. Recall that a few weeks later, Mr. Trump referred to Russia as a paper tiger. Apparently, he's considering sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine that can reach Russian soil deeply into Russian territory. And then, capping it all off, was the September 3rd, 2025 military parade in Beijing, which engendered and fomented anxiety on the faces of the captains of industry in the United States of America, not to mention the top policymakers in Washington. That was a signal, it seems to me, that China feels confident, not least because on the rostrum with President Xi was not only Chairman Kim of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, but also President Putin himself. And now, on October 9th, 10th, 2025, you have the shot over the bow by Beijing, circumscribing the export of rare earths. Now, we know that rare earths, they're not literally rare. They can be found in many sites across the planet. The problem is it's difficult to refine and process these rare earths during the heyday of positive US-China relations, as they did so heedlessly and recklessly. The United States began to rely heavily on China to refine and process these rare earths, and now China has a stranglehold over this process. It's going to be difficult for US imperialism and its allies to play catch-up ball. And so we may be entering a new phase of tension between China and US imperialism. But sad to say, we on this side of the Pacific, particularly we in the United States of America, are fundamentally on a ship of fools with a reckless captain at the wheel. Speaking of Mr. Trump, who is totally erratic, totally inconsistent, and we are headed for an iceberg, which is once again why we need to invoke. There you go.
It's gonna be a showdown. You know, Ricky Bell was Archie Bell's baby brother. He went to John C. Fremont High School, and the football stadium is named after Ricky Bell.
You mean the former football player?
Yeah. What did I? Man, I must be tripping. Yeah, the football player was a football player. Yeah, Ricky Bell. He passed away, I think. I don't know if he had an accident or he died very early, right?
Okay, I wasn't aware of that familial connection.
Yeah, yeah. He went to John C. Yeah, the football stadium is named after Ricky and Ricky Archibald from Houston, Texas. Yeah, he was on Philadelphia International, Kenny Gamble's label, right?
There you go. It'll be the
Can we
song.
talk about the? Can we talk about the Japan's Iron Lady?
Well, yeah. See, we talked last week about how she was prime minister in waiting. Speaking of Madame Takaichi, who styles herself as another Margaret Thatcher, stone cold conservative Japanese nationalist. As we reported last week, this is not necessarily good news for the People's Republic of China, given the fact that it was the Japanese nationalists who were at the controls during the time when Japan, or at least the Japanese elite, was seeking to convert China into a kind of equivalent of Africa vis-a-vis the Europeans, that is to say, a site for cruel and savage exploitation and cheap labor. And recall how we talked subsequently about that leading to the dropping of an atomic bomb on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 1945. And we talked, I believe, about how despite that particular catastrophe, that Japan still continued to wield influence in Asia. Recall that we are also marking the anniversary of October 1965, when you had what amounts to a political genocide, when one of the largest communist parties on planet Earth, speaking of that of Indonesia, was subjected to massacres, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps a million liquidated at the behest of the generals and US imperialism. Although, as I will be writing about in my book to be published in the spring on the roots of US imperialism in the Asia Pacific Basin, that we should take careful note of the fact that despite the role of the military in these massacres, citizens' militias, a la Rwanda, 1994, and or the uprooting of the indigenous in the Pacific Northwest, in Texas, that citizens' militias played a pivotal role in the genocide in Indonesia, likewise the genocide in Rwanda, likewise the genocide against Native Americans. That is to say, many of our neighbors were in the forefront, because as I will talk about in my book on the Pacific Northwest, the Euro-American settlers, they felt that the military was too weak-kneed. They had to take this situation into their own hands. Recall as well that with regard to Indonesia, in that massacre of 1965, in many ways it was a payback for what happened in 1955, with the leaders led by Sukarno spearheading the Bandung meeting. And I should also say about 1965, in terms of the research that I'm doing now, I just uncovered a little nugget that your audience might be interested in, that the man we refer to as Malcolm X, if he had not been assassinated in February 1965, by the end of the year, he was heading to Indonesia, the most populous, predominantly Muslim nation on planet Earth. We can also go to 1985, when you had the so-called Plaza Accord. This was during the era when Japanese imperialism seemed to be in the passing lane, as reflected in Hollywood, with such movies that I continue to recommend, such as Rising Sun with Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery, such as Iron Maid with Bridget Fonda, which has a riveting scene of a Japanese multi-millionaire at a hotel that was a former steel plant in Western Pennsylvania. He drives up in this Mercedes convertible with Bridget Fonda, the blonde, as they say, gets out of the car and throws the keys on the ground along with a fat tip at the feet of the valet, car valet, a former Euro-American steel worker. I can only tell you to imagine how the plot unfolds from there. The Plaza Accord, of course, was really staggering and stunning. I think I reported on that at the time, although shame on me if I did not, because it involved a gang up on a rising Japanese economy, led by the United States of America to revalue the Japanese currency, sending the Japanese economy into a tailspin from which arguably it has yet to recover. It was really stunning, and shame on all of us, particularly on the left, if we did not report on the implications of the Plaza Accord. In any case, the reason we're hedging right now on the ascension of Madame Takaichi to the prime minister's office is that one of her coalition partners apparently is getting cold feet, and she may have to knock together another parliamentary coalition in order to win the vote to become prime minister. But in any case, keep your eye on what's happening in Japan, because to reiterate what we said last week, and as I said, the U.S. ruling class would be wise to listen to Black Power 96 and these reports, because we're warning them that with their single-minded focus on destabilizing the Communist Party of China, they may be losing sight of the rise of Japanese nationalism, which hooked up with Indian nationalism under Prime Minister Modi can represent a formidable challenge, speaking euphemistically, to the ascendancy of the North Atlantic powers.
You're listening to Diasporic music, and Robert Franklin Williams, who was from Monroe, North Carolina, ran to coming to Canada, then to Cuba, eventually ended up in China, and spent some time in Tanzania, Vietnam, so on and so forth. He says when he went to, the first time he went to China, many people thought he was an Indonesian, in terms of I guess on the melanin question. The Indonesians are, many Indonesians are melanated. Let me put it that way. But could you talk about the French German tensions?
Yeah, before I do, on that latter point that you made, a complicating factor for Sukarno in Indonesia was this attempt to control Irian Jaya, which shares a gigantic island with Papua New Guinea. And as you suggest to use the term you employed, Irian Jaya is comprised heavily of, quote, melanated people, unquote. This conflict over Irian Jaya continues to this very day. And in my writing on Indonesia, particularly the pivotal year of 1965, I likely will report on the fact that it was in that year that Indonesia withdrew from the United Nations because it was not satisfied with what the United Nations was proclaiming with regard to Irian Jaya. And I dare say that weakened Sukarno in the run-up to October 1, 1965. And by the way, someone needs to do a book on the tumult of 1965, 1966, culminating with the overthrow of Nkrumah in February 1966, including the escalation of the war in Vietnam in August 1965, and of course, the political genocide in Indonesia in October 1965. Now, with regard to France and Germany, France, of course, is going through turmoil. The prime minister appointed by President Macron, he resigned a few days ago, but now he's back, and it does not look good for him because the same forces that forced him out of office, they're still in power. This may eventuate with President Macron resigning before his 2027 tenure expires. And once again, as I look at the politics of France, And I acknowledge that oftentimes the French Revolution, 1789, is grouped with the revolt against British rule in North America, 1776. And this is talked about as the age of revolution, as if there were commonalities between France and the United States, although, of course, a possible new prime minister might be a socialist. A possible president could be Mr. Mélenchon of France Unbowed, an erstwhile Trotskyist, for example. Whereas in the United States of America, we're undergoing a so-called blue scare. That is to say, Mr. Trump charging that the centrist or neoliberal Democratic Party is actually comprised of radical Marxist lunatics and radical extremists, as he terms them. He's putting many of their leaders on trial. Just this past weekend, you saw that Letitia James, the Black woman attorney general of the New York State, is now facing criminal charges. The former FBI director, James Comey, facing criminal charges. Adam Schiff, a sitting U.S. senator, Democrat from California, he's next up in the batter's box, if not preceded by John Bolton, the neoconservative hawk who ran afoul of Mr. Trump. Michael Moore, the filmmaker, I think it was in his film Sicko, he pointed out that a signal difference between France and the United States, contrary to this fallacy about a so-called age of revolution that links the two, was that in France, the government is afraid of the people. In the United States, the people are afraid of the government. It's well past time for a severe reevaluation of what led to the foundation of the United States, because I think what it leads to is incorrect analysis. We tend to overestimate our strength. And if you're a general on the battlefield, which is what, in a sense, we are, if you overestimate your strength, you should expect to be slaughtered. And if you underestimate the strength of your adversaries, likewise. And so right now, France is going through turmoil, but they're also facing confrontations, I'm afraid to say, with their European Union partners, speaking of the Federal Republic of Germany. And this is over a pivotal issue. Mr. Trump is encouraging Germany to rearm, believe it or not. And so now there's a conflict with regard to France and Germany as to who will be in the EU driver's seat with regard to rearmament. Will it be France? Will it be Germany? Either way, I don't think it bodes well for world peace and security. But it also tends to inaugurate an era where the European Union is slowed down because the locomotive, speaking of Paris and Berlin, are at each other's throats. So that's the state of play as we speak.
You're listening to Diasporic music, and I'm having a senior moment. Did we talk about the Nobel Peace Prize yet?
Not at all. And of
Okay.
course, Mr. Trump, he's been campaigning vigorously. It's, he has this thing about Obama. For some reason, Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize after assuming office in 2009. Maureen Dowd in the New York Times says he got the prize because he was, quote, a cool dude, unquote. Certainly, it had little to do with his accomplishments that in the early months of his tenure. Mr. Trump, of course, seems to be jealous of Mr. Obama. Recall that at that notorious speech at Quantico, Virginia, just a few days ago, when all of the U.S. generals and admirals across the planet were summoned to listen to Mr. Trump ramble, he also mentioned in passing that he admired the way that Mr. Obama could skip down the steps of the airport staircase after Air Force One pulls into an airport. And he mentioned sadly that he's not able to do that. I mean, why did he summon admirals and generals from all over the world to listen to that sort of nonsense? In any case, a right-wing advocate in Venezuela has gotten a Nobel Peace Prize, and this was a signal by the Nobel Committee that even though they did not give the prize to Mr. Trump, they gave it to one of his cronies. I don't think that that's going to satisfy Mr. Trump. Expect for there to be continued tension between the U.S. administration and Oslo, the U.S. administration and Stockholm. And of course, since Mr. Trump is not a student of geography, expect the tensions to extend to Denmark, not least because Denmark controls Greenland, which Mr. Trump has his eyes on.
You didn't mention the Nobel Peace Prize winner. This is the woman from Venezuela won it, right?
That is correct. Madam Machado is her name. I'll give you Maria Corina Machado, a former deputy of the National Assembly of Venezuela, educated in the United States, a member of the elite, needless to say, and she is the person that U.S. imperialism would like to see replace Maduro. My sources in Venezuela tell me that the society, understandably, is on edge. Apparently, there are reports that Grenada has been enlisted in this diabolical scheme to invade Venezuela. I would like to think that U.S. imperialism does not intend to invade Venezuela. Perhaps I'm naive, but they would like to put pressure on Venezuela in order to instigate a military coup, to have the Venezuelan military do what the United States would like to do. The problem there, of course, is the fact that there are close relations between Cuba and Venezuela, particularly in terms of political education of the military, particularly in terms of intelligence gathering. So thus far, that diabolical plan has not eventuated, but stay tuned.
Let me ask you something, Dr. Horne. The Grenada's army and navy, if they have a navy in Grenada, how would that match up with Venezuela? Compared to Grenada, their military and navy, or what whatever military forces they have, Grenada would be. It would be putting me in the mic in a ring with Mike Tyson, wouldn't you say?
Well, to be sure, but there are only 247 miles separating Grenada from Venezuela. Grenada is being positioned as a staging ground for U.S. military forces, just like Puerto Rico is a present staging ground, just like Trinidad and Tobago are being positioned as a possible staging ground. And of course, there are only 7 miles separating Trinidad and Tobago from Venezuela.
Correct.
So I'm hoping that our friends in the Caribbean do not go for the bait. They'll stand tall, but the jury's still out.
I also wanted to say I just wanted to add, like, they are occupying Haiti right now. Like, they're not leaving. So they're not leaving the airport right now. There's no planes going out. So they're occupying without saying that they're occupying. But anyway, let's move on to the Cameroon election.
92-year-old Paul Biya, who's been in office for 43 plus years, if he finishes a term that he is expected to win this weekend, he may be serving until the age of 100. He spends most of his time in a palatial hotel suite in Geneva, Switzerland, where Cameroonians in exile come to protest and picket. Recall, or maybe you don't recall, I was once on the Pacifica station in Los Angeles talking with Cameroonians about the conflict between so-called Anglophones and Francophones. And at the time, given the escalation of the tension between the two groups, reflecting, of course, that that territory was once colonized by the British and the French simultaneously, with the Francophones in the driver's seat, represented by Mr. Biya. I suggested that they consult our friends in Canada.
I remember that.
Who have similar conflicts, but you know, the Anglophones in particular, they weren't buying it. They felt that this needed to be a battle of the knife, as they say, and a battle to the death. And of course, the struggle continues.
We only have 2 minutes left, Melinda. What's the last question we want? Your book launch or the Gaza Peace. Can you deal with both of those?
Well, sure. The book launch is Friday, October 17th, Montgomery College, downtown Silver Spring, Maryland, a couple blocks from the District of Columbia line. The launch of the book, Capital of Slavery, Washington, D.C., 1800 to 1865. We had another launch in Brooklyn just this past week. And I'm getting the impression that some of the settler descendants are not happy with my work. Let's put it that way. And I think that many of the settler descendants, they can deal with being called devils. They can't deal with being called settlers or settler descendants. I mean, but that's an accurate.
Yeah, they get mad. They get mad about that.
That's an accurate descriptor. I mean, it's not like I've only been on this continent a few hundred years. I mean, you know, what am I missing? I mean, I don't get it. In any case, with regard to Gaza, I'm happy that these prisoners from Palestine will be presumably released. But after the Israelis receive their prisoners, I'm not optimistic. I expect them to charge some sort of violation of the accord with Hamas, and they will then begin to escalate the conflict once again. It's a tragedy that's unfolding. And I must say, to return to the previous point, I don't think some of the settler descendants of the United States do not like to be compared with the settlers on the West Bank, which in a sense is understandable, but I guess the truth hurts.
Yep, and I guess they don't want to be, they have a problem with calling the children of Yaqub the big head scientist, but that's another issue.
Right.
Is there anything else you wanted to add, sir?
That's it. I'll see you next week.
All right, take care. I'd like to thank Melinda Francis, and I would also really like to thank Lisa Watson for keeping us on track. And anything else, Melinda Francis?
Well, I'm just hoping and wishing that listeners stay safe throughout the week, and we'll see everybody in the whirlwind next week.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.
Power to the people.